Good morning everybody. Again it's a revision class, of course. The other day I spoke about all the three: outer ear, the middle and the inner ear. So today we'll be speaking in detail like how the auditory signals go on, how the mechanical signals are converted to electrical signals, and the auditory pathway, which of course auditory pathway is your main question, and inner ear. There are many short notes in this class. So I think you should be learning well. So the inner ear and the auditory pathway. So as we know, the ear, the mechanism of hearing is closely associated also with the mechanism of equilibrium. Hello? Okay. It's associated with the mechanism of equilibrium. Therefore, the inner ear acts as an organ of not only hearing but also equilibrium. Hearing, it acts as equilibrium, also brings about equilibrium is nothing but balancing of the body. So hearing, the sound waves have to pass through the subdivisions of the ear, which is the external ear, middle ear and the inner ear. So see, look at the diagram here. You see, of course this is a revision class. So see here the external ear. You have the external auditory meatus, then you have the tympanic membrane. This is the outer ear, the middle ear, the tympanic membrane with the three bones, stapes and all. Then you have the oval window here, you have the round window here, and you have the organ of Corti, that is the inner ear, and then you have the cochleovestibular nerve, which carries the signals. This is the same thing, the same diagram. You have the outer ear, you have the auditory canal, you have the middle ear made up of the tympanic membrane, and also you have the three bones, the incus malleus and stapes, and then the signals which are carried on inside. You have the cochlea here, where the organ of Corti is present inside, and it's carried on the vestibular cochlear nerves. This diagram shows the three bones, incus malleus and stapes, and you have two tensor tympani muscle and stapedius muscle, which I told you in detail in my last class. Same diagram. So always remember the round window and the oval window. So you have the oval window here, and this is the round window, which carries on the vibration and sets in vibration, which is further. Because of these vibrations, which are said, the impulses, the fluid, called the perineum, moves inside, and they set in vibrations where the mechanical energy is further converted into electrical impulses. The most important being the round window and also the oval window present here. The round window. Now let's come to the round window. The round window is also called as fenestrae cochlea. Is present in the lower part and is closed by a thin membrane, and it is also called as the secondary tympanic membrane. So you have the round window, which is here. This is the round window. It is also called as fenestrae cochlea, which is present in the lower part and is closed by a thin membrane called as the secondary tympanic membrane. It accommodates the pressure waves, and this pressure waves in turn transmits, pressure waves transmitted, is transmitted to the perineum. It is transmitted inside the perineum of the scala tympani. See here the round window and the oval window. So whatever the pressure waves are there, it is further pushed inside. Further, because of these vibrations, the mechanical energy is converted into the electrical energy. Now, remaining 60% of the sound energy developed in the tympanic membrane is transmitted to the cochlear fluids by the ossicles. Here, ossicles act like a lever system so that stapes exerts a greater pressure against the cochlear fluid. Now, this is the most important diagram. Now coming to the mechanism of hearing. Firstly, the sound waves strike the tympanic membrane. So see here, point number 1, the sound waves which come, they strike against the tympanic membrane. They strike the tympanic membrane, and this is converted as vibrations. The sound wave striking against the tympanic membrane causes vibration. This is point number 1. Point number 2, here the sound wave energy is transferred through 3 bones of the middle ear. What are the 3 bones? Incus, malleus and stapes. So this vibrations which is set in, a sound wave energy is transferred to the 3 bones. Thirdly, the third point, the stapes which is attached to the membrane of the oval window, the vibrations of the oval window creates fluid waves in the cochlea. So see here, because the sound waves which are hit against the tympanic membrane, the vibrations which are set in, these vibrations cause vibrations of the foot plate or stapes. This in turn causes vibration is further passed on. It literally pushes the fluid which is present through the oval window because of the vibration. The fourth point is the fluid waves push on the flexible membranes of the cochlear duct. Because of this vibrations, the fluid keeps on pushing on the flexible membrane which is present in the cochlear duct. And last, fifth point, the energy from these waves transfers across the cochlear duct into the tympanic duct and is dissipated back into the middle ear through the round window. So once the vibration pushes the fluid which is present, that's the perilimb, it again is hitting back towards the round window against the tympanic duct. And lastly, the hair cells within the cochlear duct creates action potentials in the sensory neurons of the cochlear nerve. So this is what happens. This is how the vibrations are set in. So the vibrations, the sound waves hit the tympanic membrane, causes movement of the ossicles. Vibrations are set in the oval window. That further pushes the fluid movement, which causes the fluid movement, and it again hits back against the round window, and then it again comes to the round window to hit back the sensory neurons of the cochlear nerve. Last class I told you about physics of sound. I told you what is pitch. Pitch is nothing but the frequency of sound, and frequency of sound which is audible to the human ear it lies between 20 to 20,000 hertz cycle per minute, and loudness always depends upon the amplitude of the sound waves. And see here, this is the inner ear. So now we just read what happens, scala, vestibula and tympani and all that. And see, this is the organ of Cotti in the inner ear. So as the sound waves keep coming, so see the movement which is present in the scala, vestibula, media and tympani. So the movement of the fluid keeps taking place, and this in turn causes vibration in the basilar membranes, and there are hair cells, there are movement of hair cells, and because of this fluid movement, the hair cells start moving, and that's how the cochlear nerve, the mechanical energy is transmitted to electrical energy, and further it goes on to the pathway of the auditory pathway. So this is about the inner ear. See here, the cochlear nerve transmits action potentials from the hair cells to the auditory cortex. So the movement of the fluid which is present in scala vestibuli, scala media and scala tympani causes the movement of the basilar membrane, which in turn causes the movement of the hair cells, the inner hair cells which is there. This is further carried on by the cochlear nerve, which transmits the action potentials from the hair cells to the auditory cortex, and that is the auditory pathway which we will be studying. Of course, the theories of hearing, I told you there are 2 groups of theories of hearing. The first group, which was put forth by Rutherford, which was published in 1880, which is also known as the frequency theory. According to this theory, the cochlea plays a role like a telephone transmitter, where the sound waves are converted into electrical impulses, and the same frequency is transmitted to the auditory nerve, to the cerebral cortex. Another theory came forward by the first group itself called the Woolley theory. Woolley means it's a group. So in 1959, according to this, the impulses of sound waves with frequency above 1000 cycles per second are transmitted by different groups of nerve fibers. But however, most of the physiologists didn't agree with these 2 theories. There comes the second group put on, the resonance theory of Helmholtz, which was put forward in 1863. According to this, analysis of sound frequency is the function of cochlea. Okay. As the basilar membrane contains many basilar fibers, Helmholtz compared them to the resonator of a piano. When string of a piano is struck, a sound for a particular note is heard. So similarly, he said that the basilar fibers of a particular sound is stimulated, so that particular sound is heard. Though this theory was not gradually accepted, but then this theory was further modified into another theory called as the place theory. And the place theory said that the nerve fibers from different portions of the organ of Corti on the basilar membranes gives response to the sounds of different frequency. So the corresponding nerve fibers give information to the brain regarding the portion of the organ of Corti which is stimulated. So which portion of the organ of Corti is stimulated, only that portion of the sound can be heard in the brain. That portion carries information to the brain. So this was also supported by experimental evidences which supported the wave theory. Like if a person of one particular frequency of a loud noise is exposed for a particular frequency for a long period, he becomes deaf for that frequency. That means only a specific portion of the organ of Corti is destroyed, not all the portion, the frequency for that particular sound. And that portion of organ of Corti is destroyed. Similarly, they even did studies in animals where destruction of a particular portion of organ of Corti by exposing the animal to a loud sound of a particular frequency, only that portion is damaged. And in humans, high tone deafness, there is degeneration of organ of Corti near the base of the cochlea or degeneration of the nerve supplying the cochlea. So during exposure to high frequency sounds, there is something called as cochlear microphonic potentials which show greater voltage in the hair cells near the base of the cochlea. So higher frequency sounds which show greater voltage near the base of the cochlea. And also exposure to lower frequency shows cochlear microphonic potentials with greater voltage near the apex. Higher frequency shows near the base of the cochlea and lower frequency shows cochlear microphonic potentials near the apex of the cochlea. So there is a point-to-point representation of this basilar membrane in the auditory cortex. That's how the wave theory was supported. Now coming from place theory, emerged another theory called as the travelling wave theory. Now this says that the movement of states causes displacement of the fluid. I told you the movement of states causes displacement of the fluid in the scala vestibulare, scala media and also in the scala tympani. So this movement itself causes vibrations present in the basilar portion of the organ. This is organ of Corti. So this produces a wave in the basal portion of the basilar membrane which travels towards the apex. So the basal portions are set into vibration based on the frequency of the sound. As the wave travels towards the apex, it becomes strong at one point of the membrane, and here as it passes through the apex, it becomes strong at one point of the membrane. So here, because of the vibrations which are set in the basilar membrane, the vibrations will be set in. As the vibrations move towards the apex, at one point it becomes very strong and it's called as a resonance point. So travelling wave thus helps in appreciating the sound of a particular frequency by vibrating the specific part of the basilar membrane. High frequency sounds travel a short distance on the basilar membrane before reaching the resonance point, and medium frequency sounds travels halfway of the membrane, while low frequency sounds travel entirely of the membrane. So sound frequency travels fastest at the base and becomes slower as they move towards the apex. Rapid transmission at the initial part helps to discriminate between the high frequency sounds. So now we learned how the frequency, because of the frequency of the sound, how vibrations are set in and how it's carried by the cochlear nerve. Now appreciation of loudness of sounds, of course, depends upon, firstly it depends upon the rate of discharge of individual fibers and also the total number of nerve fibers that are discharging. So when loudness increases, it obviously produces large vibrations. The activity of number of hair cells recruits more number of nerve fibers, therefore the frequency of action potential also increases. So it mainly depends on the rate of the discharge of individual fibers. It also depends upon the total number of nerve fibers which are recruited for discharging. Localization, it's very clear, the ability to detect the source from where the sound is produced or the direction through which the sound is traveling is through the cerebral cortex and the medial geniculate body, which is responsible for localization of sound, which is the most important factor for survival. So now we saw about the frequency, the pitch, the loudness, and how the sound is produced and all that. So now let's study about the auditory pathway. Auditory pathway. So now this is the organ of Corti, which is present in the internal ear, and how this organ of Corti, how it transmits the impulses and how it's carried on to the auditory cortex. So let's see. So the first point is the nerve fibers from the hair cells from the organ of Corti end in the spiral ganglia of the Corti. So see here, the nerve fibers which are carried from the organ of Corti, they go and synapse, they end in the spiral ganglia of the cochlear nerve. The spiral organ of the Corti, the nerve fibers from the organ of Corti, they carry impulses which, due to the vibrations, they carry these impulses and it ends in the spiral ganglia of the cochlear nerve. The fibers from the spiral ganglia pass to the dorsal and the ventral cochlear nuclei, which is located in the upper part of the medulla. So now from the spiral ganglia, these fibers go and they synapse where? They synapse in the dorsal and the ventral cochlear nuclei, which is present in the upper part of the medulla. So they go and synapse in the dorsal and ventral cochlear nuclei, which is present in the upper part of the medulla. Second order neurons pass to the opposite side of the brain stem. So see here, so this is on the same side, they go from the spiral ganglia and they go to the dorsal and the ventral cochlear nuclei, which is present in the upper part of the medulla. Later they cross over and they synapse. Where do they synapse? They synapse in the superior olivary nucleus, which is also present in the medulla. They synapse in the superior olivary nucleus. Some fibers, though they pass on the same side, but maximum fibers they cross over. So nerve fibers from the organ of Corti, they go and they synapse in the spiral ganglia of the cochlear nerve. Later they go to the superior, they go to the dorsal and the ventral cochlear nuclei, which is present in the upper part of the medulla. They cross over, though very few fibers they go on the same track, but most of them cross over and they synapse in the superior olivary nucleus, which is present in the medulla. Some fibers also pass on the same side. From the superior olivary nucleus, they pass through the lateral lemniscus and a few terminate in the nucleus of lateral lemniscus. So see here, the lateral lemniscus, this whole bundle is called lateral lemniscus. So most of the fibers, they form lateral lemniscus and few terminate and end there only, but majority of them go, this few terminate in the nucleus of the lateral lemniscus. So from the superior olivary nucleus, they pass through the lateral lemniscus, whereas a few, they pass through this lateral lemniscus, the few terminate in the nucleus of lateral lemniscus. The remaining fibers bypass the nucleus and they reach the inferior colliculus through the cochlear nerve. So see here, the remaining fibers, they pass through the nucleus of lateral lemniscus and they go and they synapse in the inferior collicular nucleus. So the lateral lemniscus which is there, the fiber from the superior olivary nucleus, they pass through the lateral lemniscus and few bypass and few terminate in the nucleus itself. The remaining fibers bypass the nucleus, they reach the inferior colliculus through the cochlear nerve. So see here, they reach the inferior colliculus. This is the inferior colliculus which they reach through the cochlear nerve. After lateral lemniscus, few fibers terminate in the nucleus and most of them go up and they reach the inferior colliculus through the cochlear nerve. From the inferior colliculus, fibers pass through the medial geniculate body where all the fibers synapse. So from here they go to the medial geniculate body where all the fibers synapse. Medial geniculate body where all the fibers synapse. That is the primary medial geniculate body, primary auditory cortex in the temporal lobe. So understood the auditory pathway from the organ of Corte present in the internal ear. The fibers carry impulses. They reach the spiral ganglia of the cochlear nerve. They further go to the dorsal and the ventral nuclei which is present in the upper part of the medulla. Most of them cross over and they decussate in the, superior olivary nucleus which is present in the upper part of the junction between pons and medulla, and then they form lateral lemniscus. Of course, a few terminate in the lemniscus nuclei and most of them, and some fibers go on the same path, very few fibers, but maximum pass on to this side and they go as lateral lemniscus, and further they reach the inferior colliculi through the cochlear nerve, and later they decussate in the primary auditory cortex which is present in the temporal lobe. So I suppose it is clear. The pathway then proceeds through the auditory radiations to the auditory cortex area. Areas number 41 and 42 present in the superior gyrus of the temporal lobe, and there are also auditory association areas. It may be 21, 20, 21 and 22. So this is about the auditory pathway. At this juncture, you should know a few short notes, that is endocochlear potential. What is endocochlear potential? We know there is fluid called as endolymph which contains a high concentration of potassium and is electrically positive when compared to perilymph. Perilymph is the outer fluid, endolymph is a fluid which is present inside. So the endolymph which is present, the fluid which is present inside is rich in potassium. The plus 80 millivolt electrical potential which exists between endolymph of scala media, perilymph of scala vestibuli and scala tympani is called endolymphatic or endocochlear potential. I will show you the diagram here. See here, the endolymph is the fluid which is present here, which is present in scala vestibuli, scala media and scala tympani. The fluid which is present here is rich in potassium, and this fluid is called as endolymphatic fluid. So, and this is rich in potassium. Okay. So, it has a high concentration of potassium and is electrically positive when compared to the perilymph which is outside the scala vestibuli, scala tympani and scala media. So there is a difference of plus 18 millivolts of electrical potential which exists between the endolymph and the perilymph of the scala vestibuli, tympani and it's called as endolymphatic or endocochlear potential. Source of this endolymphatic potential is the striae vascularis which covers the lateral wall of the scala media. So what is endocochlear potential? It's the endolymph which contains high concentration of potassium and is electrically positive in compared to the perilymph. The plus 80 millivolts of electrical potential which exists between endolymph of scala media and perilymph of scala vestibuli and tympani. So they are comparing the endolymph of media with the perilymph of vestibuli and tympani is called as endolymphatic or endocochlear potential. That is the potential difference between the endolymph of scala media and the perilymph of the scala vestibuli and scala tympani. This is called as endocochlear potential. The potential difference, that is plus 80 millivolts. So the source of this potential is striae vascularis which covers the scala media. So let me show you in the diagram the potential difference between the scala media. So this will be the scala media. So the difference between this and the perilymph of scala vestibuli and tympani. So this has a there is plus 80 millivolts of difference. So that is endocochlear potential. The characteristic features of the cells of striae vascularis contribute to this high potassium concentration of endolymph. The characteristic feature is high concentration of sodium potassium ATPase and presence of electrogenic potassium pump. So there is also resting potential for the hair cells. Each hair cell has a negative resting potential, and therefore the intracellular fluid is at a potential of -70 millivolts with respect to the perilymph of the scala tympani. So that's why the scala media, the intracellular fluid which is present, the resting membrane potential there, the intracellular fluid is at it has a negative resting potential of the hair cells, that is -70 millivolts with respect to the perilymph of scala tympani. This large negative potential and lack of potassium concentration difference between inside and outside the hair cells makes it very sensitive. So it is this potential difference which makes the hair cells very sensitive. Which difference? The hair cell which has a negative resting potential and with respect to the perilymph of the scala tympani. So this large negative potential and the lack of potassium concentration between inside and outside of the hair cells makes the hair cells very sensitive. So even the slightest movement of the hair cells stimulates the cells. So slightest movement. So that's what he is telling. The inside and the outside. These hair cells have a negative potential, a negative resting membrane potential, and the potential difference between inside of the hair cells and outside the hair cells. The hair cells are actually bathed in fluid. So inside and outside there is a potential difference. So even slight movement can cause this potential difference. So see here, firstly we come to the diagram A. So the diagram A says the tectorial membrane and the basilar membrane are attached to the limbus at the different parts. So see here, this is the tectorial membrane and this is the basilar membrane, and you have rods of organ of Corti and you have the inner hair cell. So see here the movement if it goes upwards. So the B, the point B says upward movement. So the upward movement of the organ of Corti causes bending of the cilia. The upward movement of the organ of Corti causes bending of the cilia away from the limbus. So if there is upward movement, the cilia bends away from the limbus. If it's a downward movement, the cilia bends towards the limbus. So in case of upward movements, the cilia bends away from the limbus. If there is a downward movement, the cilia bends towards the limbus. And this movement itself causes the potential difference causing cochlear microphonic potential. So potential is recorded in the ear on stimulation. When the ear is stimulated by sound, there are two types of potentials that can be recorded. One is cochlear microphonic potential and the other one is action potential in the auditory unit. So you've got to know what is cochlear microphonic potential. When stimulated by a sound wave, the changes in the membrane potential of the hair cells results in changes in the cation conduction of at the apical ends. So the cation which is present, the gating of this potassium channels is controlled by bending of the stereocilia. Stereocilia, I told you, the inner hair cells, they call as stereocilia. These cilia, they bend. So this bending causes, there are gates of potassium channels which controls the bending of stereocilia. When the stereocilia bend away from the limbus, they cause the potassium channels to open. So see here, when the stereocilia bends away from the potassium channels, when the stereocilia which is present, when the stereocilia bends away from the limbus, the potassium channels are open. So the potassium and calcium influx is there. When they bend towards, the potassium channels are closed. So that is what is the meaning of it. So this the gating of the potassium channels is controlled by the bending of the stereocilia. When the stereocilia bends away from the limbus, they cause the potassium channels to open. The potassium then flows inside the channels and the hair cell gets depolarized. When the stereocilia bends towards the limbus, it causes the potassium channels to close and it gets hyperpolarized. Overall, the sum of the receptor potential of the number of hair cells when recorded extracellularly, this Sorry. This potential is called as cochlear microphonic potential. It is nothing but the oscillatory event that is recorded by placing one electrode in the scalar media and other in the scalar tumkur. The qualities of this potential is it has no latency or refractory period, that is the characteristic. They do not obey all or none law and they are resistant to ischemia and anesthesia. When the organ of Corti is damaged after by prolonged exposure to loud tone, the cochlear microphonic potential produced by this particular band of frequency is lost. So loud noise can literally lose or abolish the cochlear microphonic potential. The events of genesis of action potential is as follows. When shorter stereocilia are pushed towards the higher neighboring ones, the channel opens and potassium and calcium influx causes. So when they are pushed towards, I told you, when they push towards, here the channel remains closed when they are pushing towards. When they are pushing away towards the higher ones, the potassium and calcium channels open and there is influx of potassium and calcium. When shorter stereocilia are pushed towards the higher ones, the channels open, potassium and calcium influx takes place causing depolarization. The molecular motors. So see here the molecular motors which are present. The molecular motor present here is myosin. So the molecular motor present in the higher neighboring process moves the channel towards the base. Thereby what does it do? Once see the channel which is present up, it now opens when the shorter ones move towards the higher stereocilia. The channels of potassium and calcium are open. There is influx of potassium and calcium ions. Now the molecular motor which is present, it moves the channel towards the base. So in order to break the tension which is present in the channels, the molecular motors present in the higher neighboring process moves the channel towards the base, thereby releasing the tension in the tip of the limb. This causes closure of the mechanosensitive cation channel and permits restoration to the resting state. So once it moves towards the base, it causes closure of the channels and thus bringing it to resting membrane potential. The shorter stereocilia, when they come closer to the higher ones, the channels open, there is influx of potassium and calcium. There is influx of potassium and calcium, the channels open and later the molecular motor pushes once the depolarization takes place, it pushes the channels towards the base, bringing back to hyperpolarization and resting membrane potential. So this is how the depolarization of the hair cells causes release of neurotransmitter called glutamate, which initiates depolarization of the neighboring afferent neurons and thus causes generation of an action potential. So this depolarization which is brought about, by influx of potassium and calcium releases an excitatory neurotransmitter called as glutamate, which initiates the depolarization of the neighboring afferent neurons and causes generation of action potential. The action potential is generated. The potassium that enters the hair cells through the mechanosensitive channels is recycled and this enters through the tight junctions into the neighboring supporting cells and reaches the stria vascularis and again it is secreted back into the endolymph, making the endolymph rich in potassium, thus completing the cycles on and on. So whatever potassium is there, it gets back into the endolymph through the tight junctions and again it is utilized for depolarization. Again this whole cycle keeps on repeating on and on. At low sound intensities, each axon discharges to sounds of only one frequency. This is at low sound intensities. At higher sound intensities, the individual axon responds to an increasingly wide range of sound frequencies. Again at this juncture, the most important short note is masking. Now what is masking? You enter a vegetable market. Okay, you will have so many noises there. So even if you are talking to your parents or to your friend in a market, what happens? You will be unable to hear because so many sounds are predominant and one particular sound which you will be talking you can't hear. Example, your phone. Even the phone rings you will not be able to hear. Why? Because there are other predominant sounds. So that is called masking. Masking refers to a phenomena in which presence of one type of sound decreases the ability to hear another type of sound. Example, if you are in a classroom which has 2-3 fans with loud sound, you will not even be able to hear the teacher's voice, or you will not be able to hear the sound which is present outside, because this sound will be predominant which is coming from the fan, noisy fan. Similarly, in a vegetable market, the sound will be so much you will not even be able to hear the ringing of your phone. That means it's a phenomena in which the presence of one type of sound decreases the ability of the ear to hear another type of sound. In other words, masking represents the inability of the auditory mechanism to separate simultaneous stimulation into two separate components. So simultaneous stimulation into two separate components. Masking is more effective from sounds with similar frequencies than with sounds widely with different frequencies. Okay, so it is effective. It's more effective for sounds with similar, all loud noises coming together. Okay, with similar frequencies than with sounds for widely different frequencies you will unable to hear, where one sound predominates over the other one. Low frequency tone masks high frequency tone more easily than the opposite. So example of masking observed is difficulty in conversation in a noisy surrounding. So this completes the inner ear, its functions, the auditory pathway and different theories which are set forward for hearing. Okay, so please read up. You have short notes like endocochlear potential, like masking. You have long essays. You have main questions like auditory pathway. Okay, so all this auditory pathway, and you have different theories of hearing. So again, a quick revision, let me tell you. So you have theories of hearing and all that. So you have the diagram of the inner ear and its components and all that. Then you have how is hearing brought about a mechanism. Then you should know what is pitch, what is loudness, and you should know the organ of Cochlea, which is very important, and the hair cells. Here you see the hair cells. The hair cells, the inner hair cells present in the organ of Cochlea. You should know how to draw it. You should know the basilar membrane, the pictorial membrane, the different theories, and most important among these theories is also the traveling wave theory, and how the appreciation of loudness of sounds takes place, and the auditory pathway, which is most important, from the auditory, from the organ of Cochlea, how it ends in the spinal ganglia of the cochlear nerve, and later by the vestibulocochlear nerve, which is the 8th nerve. It's carried on to the dorsal and ventral nuclei present in the lower part of the medulla, and then it crosses over into the superior olivary nucleus, and there in the adjunction of pons and medulla, then it goes as lemniscus flutoid in the nucleus of the lateral lemniscus, and further they move on to the inferior colliculi, and later it goes here to the primary auditory cortex in the medial geniculate body. Okay, so it goes in the medial geniculate body, and then it goes on as radiation to the primary auditory cortex, and also in the auditory association areas 20, 21, 22. So it goes there, and you should know what is endocochlear potential, most important shock note. So how much is it, and how much is the potential difference, and what is the unique feature of that. And you should know the resting membrane potential of the hair cell, which is -40, and you should know the movements of the basilar membrane and all that. And then you should also know how the stereocilia, when they come closer to the smaller ones, when they come to the larger ones, how the sodium, I'm sorry about that, it's our potassium and calcium, how the channels open and causes influx of potassium and channels, of potassium and calcium channels causing depolarization. Once they cause depolarization, the channels are open. Then the myosin, which is present, molecular motor, it pushes the channel downwards and then it causes closure of these gates. And it comes back to resting membrane potential. Then the most important shuttle being masking. What is masking? It refers to the phenomenon presence of one type of sound. Presence of one type of sound increases the ability of the ear to hear another type of sound. So this will come to the end of the chapter. Thank you. Please read and study well.